Today, I want to talk about a story that may sound technical on the surface, but it has very real implications for agents, brokers, buyers, and sellers across the industry. Illinois is now part of the growing fight over private real estate listings. And this matters because it's not just about one bill in the state, it's about where control over listing strategy is heading, who gets access to housing inventory, and how agents are expected to balance seller choice and market transparency. Let's start with the basic issue. A private listing, sometimes called a pocket listing or office exclusive, depending on the setup, is a property that's marketed in a limited way instead of being broadly exposed to the public right away. Sometimes it's shared only inside a brokerage. Sometimes it's shown to a select group of agents, buyers, or private networks. Sometimes it's held off the open market completely for a period of time. The argument in favor of private listings is pretty straightforward. Some sellers want to test pricing quietly. Some sellers do not want consistent showings or a flood of public attention. In certain situations, there may be legitimate reasons a seller does not want a property fully public from day one. But the argument against private listings is just as strong. The more limited the exposure, the smaller the buyer pool. The smaller the buyer pool, the greater the risk that the seller leaves money or better terms on the table. It also raises bigger questions around fairness, equal access, and whether all qualified buyers really had a shot. That is why this issue has become so heated. For a while, this debate mostly lived inside the industry. It was about MLS rules, brokerage practices, portal battles, and the National Association of Realtors' clear cooperation conversations. But now states are getting involved, and that changes the conversation completely. Illinois is a good example. The current proposal in Illinois would require most home listings to be publicly advertised online within 1 calendar day of the listing agreement, unless the seller signs a disclosure and opt-out form. That may sound like a minor compliance detail, but it's actually a very meaningful shift. Why? Because once a state starts writing this into law, it stops being just a professional norm or an MLS policy issue. It becomes a legal framework that affects how brokers advise clients, how firms train agents, and how sellers make marketing decisions. And that's really where the story gets interesting. When you zoom out, it's not just a policy fight, it's a strategy fight. If you're a seller, the question is this: what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for privacy, convenience, less disruption? Or are you optimizing for maximum exposure, broader competition, and potentially the best pricing outcome? Those are not always the same thing. The problem is that many consumers do not fully understand the trade-off. They hear words like exclusive, private, curated, pre-market, and it can sound sophisticated. But in practice, limited exposure may simply mean fewer eyeballs, fewer offers, and less leverage. And that is why agent communication matters so much here. The best agents are not just going to say, here's what the law says. They're going to say, here's what each path means for your outcome. Here is the visibility you gain. Here is the leverage you may lose. Here is the privacy benefit. Here is the market risk. Here is how buyers behave when inventory is constrained. And here is what that means for your specific home, in your specific market, at your specific price point. That is the real value of professional guidance. There's another layer here too. And that is consumer trust. Real estate already has enough public skepticism around commissions, transparency, access, and fairness. If consumers start to believe that inventory is being selectively hidden, controlled, or distributed through insider channels, that creates even more distrust. And that is bad for the industry as a whole. On the other hand, a lot of agents would argue that one-size-fits-all rules are not always the answer either. There are situations where sellers genuinely need discretion. There are luxury situations, personal safety situations, family situations, and occupancy situations where broad public marketing may not be ideal on day one. So this is where I think the conversation should go. It should not be framed as private listings are always bad or public marketing is always best. It should be framed around informed consent, clear disclosure, and professional accountability. If a seller wants limited marketing, that seller should understand exactly what they're choosing and what they may be giving up. If a property is marketed broadly, the seller should understand why that exposure may improve the odds of a stronger outcome. And if agents are operating in a state where laws are changing, they need to be ahead of the curve, not reacting after the fact. Here's my bigger takeaway. Illinois is probably not the end of this conversation. It may be part of the beginning of a broader state-by-state shift in how listing transparency is regulated. That means brokers should be reviewing policies, training agents, tightening disclosures, and preparing for more scrutiny around how listings are marketed. For agents, this is also a branding opportunity. Consumers are looking for clarity. They want advisors who can simplify complex issues. If you can explain the private listings debate in plain language and connect it directly to seller outcomes, buyer access, and smart strategy, you instantly sound more credible than the agent who just repeats industry talking points. So, whether you agree with Illinois stepping in or not, this story matters. It matters because it affects seller choice. It matters because it affects buyer access. It matters because it affects agent liability and compliance. And it matters because it speaks to the future of how homes are marketed in America. The question is not just whether private listings should exist. The bigger question is this: who should set the rules, and what kind of market do we want to create? That is the conversation I think every serious real estate professional should be paying attention to right now. If you're an agent or broker, I would love to hear your take. Should sellers have the right to market privately first, or should every listing hit the public market quickly for maximum transparency?